Hello my dear friends, and welcome back to another Star Wars video. It is I coming at you once again, your favourite galactic hostess, Star Wars Meg. And as you know, this year marks the 10th anniversary of Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. And I've noticed several other Star Wars YouTubers have done something of a retrospective. And so, as a Star Wars channel myself, I thought I would do the same thing, join the chorus of voices and give you my take on Episode 7, A Decade On. Now, some of you will know this is actually my 4th video on the subject, my 4th video on The Force Awakens turning 10, but my retrospective today is going to be different. This is going to be unique. I could just sit here and crap all over the movie, give you the same talking points you've heard a million times over, but that would be redundant. I could recycle the same opinion you've heard time and again, that The Force Awakens was derivative of A New Hope, that it was the beginning of a wasted trilogy that made the prequels look good by comparison, but that's not exactly what I want to achieve with this video. I am indeed a prequel trilogy fan, and it would be very easy for me to just tear into the sequels, just bash them, and tell you what I didn't like. But instead, I'm gonna take a different approach. In preparation for this video, I sat down, phone off, and rewatched Episode 7 from start to finish, as if it was 2015 all over again. And even though I have revisited the movie a few times, mainly for other videos I've made on deleted scenes or specific details, this time round, I found the movie was weirder than I remembered. Now I tried not to let my biases take over, because I wanted to give it a fair shot, but there are several ways The Force Awakens has aged very bizarrely in the last decade, and not in the ways you might expect. But first, let me set the scene and tell you about my own personal relationship with this movie. 10 years ago, I sat down at my local cinema to watch The Force Awakens for the very first time, and I remember how excited I was to be re-immersed in the galaxy far, far away, after a decade without it, or at least without the mainstream buzz. I'd started watching Star Wars Rebels around that same time, but this was so much bigger. This was the Skywalker saga returning to theaters, and at the time, I quite enjoyed the movie. In fact, most fans I knew did. Even YouTubers who I watched back then, who would later dislike episodes 8 and 9, seemed to have at least a tepid view of this film. And even people who complained the movie played it very safe with classical Star Wars tropes were on the edge of their seats when Rey finally found Luke at the end of The Force Awakens. And if you weren't there, or you didn't experience the hype, the feeling was indescribable. And while the trilogy as a whole was incohesive and was a bit of a mess, there was something in the air during that time. The Force was strong, as audiences packed theaters wearing Jedi robes and raising their lightsabers in unison. And why shouldn't they have been excited? It had been 10 years since the end of the prequel trilogy, which, for many fans, was something of a disappointment. So this marked the beginning of the next chapter for Star Wars. Episode 7 gave fans just enough excitement, the promise of potentially great things to come. The characters were decent, actually quite likable and charismatic I would say, John Williams' score was impeccable as always, and the visuals were groundbreaking. However, that promise would soon fade. As Space.com puts it, 10 years later, The Force Awakens stands as the blueprint for a Star Wars that never was. And it's this very misdirected creative vision that is the most frustrating thing about J.J. Abrams' effort. The fact we never got to see a stormtrooper become a Jedi. The waste of the character of Rey. The way the trilogy never properly reunited the original trilogy heroes in a satisfying way. The list goes on and on. But to honor the 10th anniversary, I gave the movie another shot, but watching it in 2025 is very different to watching it back in 2015. Since, not only have the other 2 sequels released, but we've had 2 standalone films and about a dozen TV shows, both live action and animated. We finally see how Disney has handled the Star Wars IP, and the fan perception of Star Wars these days is not as optimistic as it was 10 years ago. So, I began watching it, and I wanted to share with you some of my remarks 10 years on. These are in no particular order, and like I said at the start of the video, these are unique to my viewing experience. You might agree with some of these points and disagree with others, that's fine. Note number 1. John Williams gives the movie a heartbeat it might not have otherwise had. Sure, you can say this about most Skywalker saga installments, but it rings particularly true with Episode 7. The sporadic use of the Force theme, especially when Han is explaining to Rey that both the Force is real and so is the legend of Luke Skywalker. And I got a similar nostalgic feeling when a variation of Han Solo and the Princess from The Empire Strikes Back plays, when the two characters meet again after all these years. Then, there are more uplifting musical moments. For instance, when the Falcon lands on Takodana. But when it comes to the score of this film, there are two undeniably brilliant moments. Say what you will about the character herself, but Rey's theme is excellent. Rey's introduction. And the second is Jedi Steps and Finale, the final moment of the film, when thanks to R2-D2's archive, the remainder of the map to Luke is found. And when he turns around to face Rey in a literal cliffhanger, Jedi Steps into Finale is one of the best endings, musically speaking, of the modern Star Wars era. Note number 2. This one isn't as positive as the first, but remains one of my biggest criticisms of the entire thing. Han Solo being something of a deadbeat and having separated from Leia. Now look, in the expanded universe, Han and Leia's relationship was also pretty tense. They had a lot of arguments, spent long periods apart, and their personalities did clash. Han Solo hated standing still. And if you want to talk about the parenting aspect, this is where both canon and legends have a lot in common. In fact, the EU version of Han might be worse. For many years, they barely spent any time with their kids. Instead, they allowed people like Winter, Admiral Akbar, and various nanny droids to look after Jason, Jaina, and Anakin. At least in The Force Awakens, Han Solo was trying to make amends with Ben. He was well-intentioned, but still, it was sad to see such a fragmented relationship. And I understand the movie gives this plot point a lot of exposition. Leia mentions when she lost Ben, she also lost Han, but I still don't like the way these two are treated. I also wasn't a fan of Han's death, something which Marshall Lucas even criticized. It was part of Harrison Ford's agreement to return. Note number 3. The comedy in this movie is really awkward and doesn't really land in the same way 10 years on. Now this is a weird one. It's something that is probably very subjective, but bear with me on this. I recently had a conversation with a close friend, and she brought up how weird comedy is these days. Every decade had its own flavour of it, but the 2020s are uniquely different. Memes and TikToks, sharp pressured reactions, and while the 2010s, which is when the sequel trilogy came out, was starting to lean in that direction, it also had a very unique, mainstream sense of humour. The best way to describe it is SNL-style rhythms and a focus on intentional awkwardness, and The Force Awakens is full of that flavour of comedy. And nowhere is this clearer than in Poe Dameron's opening line to Kylo Ren. Who talks first? You talk first, I talk first. Same thing with The Last Jedi, when Poe makes a "your mum" joke to General Hux. But returning to The Force Awakens, another great example is Finn's cute boyfriend joke. So now we move on to note number 4. Rey was more dislikable than I remember. I'm not saying this to shit on the character, which is a very popular thing to do, but I've often said there are 3 distinct iterations of Rey. Each sequel movie showed off a different side to her. In episode 7, she's the scavenger, launched inadvertently into the world of the Force, the Resistance, and the Jedi. Episode 8 gave us Rey Nobody, who was letting go of her past, and who was the dictator of her own fate. Episode 9 kind of reversed this, and gave us a Rey that was, well, Palpatine's granddaughter. But in my assessments, I've often preferred episode 7 Rey to the other 2, but she's far more awkward than I remember. I still think Daisy did a good job with what she was given, but I didn't realise that it's only later on, in episode 8, that she's more convincing than the Rey of episode 7. Note number 5. Chewie is still a gem, and no one can convince me otherwise. Loyal to Han, despite all they've been through, and his pain and grief when Han dies broke my heart. So, those are just some of my remarks. Rewatching the film after 10 years, I think that will do for my retrospective. But I would love to know what you guys think. How do you feel about the movie 10 years later? Have you done a rewatch? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you're new to my channel, guys, please be sure to subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and check me out on socials at StarWarsMeg1 on Twitter, and the link to my Patreon is down in the description. But until the next one, my dear friends, may the Force be with you, always.